At this point, we're going to turn our attention to this panel discussion. Now, I thought this is the first time, really, we've ever done this at Wayne where it's been more than just artists in residence, where we're doing more than just having lectures and so on. It's been 2 days of presentations, workshops, master classes by all involved. And I thought it would be really fun and really unique, actually, to put everyone at the table and introduce you to who these guys are, and then throw out some general subjects and take some general questions from you here and the folks at the online community about anything, saxophone, sound, music, the business, anything, and see what this diverse mix of artists and craftsmen can discuss about it. I know it's not often people, when you speak about music, people tune out a little bit, but I think this is such an interesting mix of individuals that it should be quite engaging. So let me bring them up. In addition to who we have here, I'm going to ask to join us Mr. Francois Louis from Belgium, the great mouthpiece maker and inventor. And from Corna Soto, Italy, the maker of handmade saxophones from Rampone and Cazzani saxophones, Mr. Claudio Zola. And from here in Detroit, Michigan, a dear friend, one of the great masters of jazz that we have here. He was a teacher at Wayne State when I was here, and we've asked for him to come back on faculty starting in January because he has so much history to offer all of us here. It's exciting to have him here with us as well. The great Mr. George Benson. I'm going to change to a lavalier mic, but the first, I'm going to start by just putting a discussion on the table. Please, it's open discussion, and feel free to interject as you will. Creating an individual sound, the concept of creating an individual sound. What any of you may have to say about that would be interesting to me. Jerry, would you like to start?
Well, I'd like to follow that up with a question. Well, or another perspective. You know, I think of my favorite players in, for example, Joe Henderson. And he played a D. Selmer with a medium soft Lavaux reed, and then I think of somebody like Sonny Rollins, who always played like really big mouthpieces, 10-star Lynx, and 130 or 135 Bergs and 140 Bergs, Larson's big tip opening. And I wonder, who, like, if the equipment you use is dictates some of your stylistic tendencies, and I asked that to Francois Louis as he
could hear the question was addressed to me. So, first of all, what I always say is keep saying, and probably will tell to the end of my life, is the sound is you. So it's a little similar to things you expressed yesterday, Jerry, that before to articulate a sound, you have to build it up in your mind. So I think the most important element to develop a sound is to have an idea of the sound you want to develop. And then try to hear it inside of you. So it's like people figure out easier to have mental images. You close eyes, you imagine a situation, and you can see a landscape and colors and whatever. So I think it's just a question of the same type of exercises. I don't know for what reason it helps while you close eyes, but to hear sounds and then play with those sounds. Okay, from that point, then, for any reason, someone decides to play the saxophone. Oh, poor him. And, of course, probably one of the main reasons why someone starts to play the saxophone is because of the sound of the saxophone. So there is a particular sound signature, as we say. And this signature is some characteristic that is not depending on you, but depending on the instrument. So this is, according to my opinion, a big part, but also the smallest part about your creativity. So first, the signature, what it is a single reed instrument that gives a particular buzz, and that's really this characteristic, making vibrate behind of the reed this piece of metal. This, I would say, in a way you can't escape. This is the saxophone sound. But from that, okay, to pronounce this sound, you need to put up a setup that fits you. So what is a good setup? Is the one with which you will feel comfortable to just reproduce the sound you have in your mind without having any barrier. And it's different for everybody. As I said a little bit in my lecture yesterday, some people, they need some resistance to go deep in their creation. Some other people, they just don't need. I guess my man Joe Henderson would probably be totally destroyed if he would have to fight some resisting setup. He had a big sound. It's not because you have a small mouthpiece that you're not going to get a big sound. He had a big sound because he had a big sound in his head. My man Sonny, you know, is 75 now. He's working in his garden, chopping wood. He's in shape. He needs to fight. He plays big mouthpiece, hard reeds. So I'm a little bit the same way. So everybody has his own approach. So if you need resistance, you better play some heavy stuff. If you need something that's, you could play with the nose, just play a small mouthpiece and a soft reed. So from that, we can do a lot of things, of course, in the mouthpiece that will help. As I used to say, don't expect the setup to make the sound for you. If you don't feel responsible yourself for at least 95% of your sound, you better go back to practice. So for those 5% left, they better work together with you so you don't have to fight against the setup, So, is that a clear answer?
Yes, great answer.
I have a funny story about this that Benny Golson told me some years ago. Benny and John Coltrane were very close friends, and they grew up together in Philadelphia. And when they were like, I think 14 or 15 years old, they were playing alto both, and both were fanatic of Charlie Parker, of course. And so one day, a train came to Benny's house and was very excited because, hey, Benny, finally I had the right setup, and he just bought like I think it was a con that this particular moment that Parker was playing with the same brilliant mouthpiece, the same reed. I got to set up, I got to set up a bird. So he assembled the stuff, started playing. A few notes. How does it sound? How does it sound? And Benny said, I'm sorry, John, but he plays like yourself. And so he was completely depressed because I spent a lot of money to get this set up. But finally, Benny said it was a very important lesson because they really realized that it wasn't the exact setup that was made in the sound, but the personality of the musician.
I want to direct it a little bit at George Benson. I remember as a young man not knowing much at all about sound, just sort of blowing into the horn. And probably like many students, I said at a lesson to George at one point, is this a good sound? Is this a bad sound? What do I do to get a good sound? What is a good sound? How do I make this happen? And I recall his answer was, I'm not going to tell you how to sound, man. You sound. You got to find your sound. You have to explore it, and then you will know. You have to make that decision. What is good and what is bad? That's what defines you. That's what defines your sound. George, in addition to that kind of advice, you've had so many students, and I'm sure you've had that question asked over and over again. And your sound certainly encompasses not only the traditional elements of tenor saxophone, but also what I like to call the Detroit sound, which has mixes of R&B saxophone elements, the bebop elements, Sonny Rollins, Coleman Hawkins, all rolled into a big ball. What thoughts do you have on the subject?
Okay, get close here. I come up, before all these guys, because I'll be 80 my next birthday. So, well, let me tell you a little story. I was up in my aunt's attic one day when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I saw this uniform, which was my uncle's from having being in a marching band. So he had passed, and so I asked my aunt, I said, gee, can I wear that uniform? She said, well, he was in the marching band, so you have to learn to play the saxophone. So I asked her, could I take it to school? And I had lessons 3 days a week. Somebody came by the school and gave us lessons 3 days a week. And that's how I got started. It wasn't because of the saxophone, it was because of the uniform that I wanted to play. But anyway, this was a C melody saxophone, so this was the first one I started out with. And my father saw that I was really interested in the saxophone, so he bought me a saxophone. There was he worked at Kresge downtown at 35 West Grand River, and a man named Tom Sawyer had a saxophone studio up on the 6th or 7th floor or something. So my father made a little deal with him, and he bought a saxophone. But I listened to Coleman Hawkins. Coleman was one of my heroes, as was Johnny Hodges. And I would stay up at night and try to copy his solo on Body and Soul. I loved that. And then, well, I started out after the C melody. I had an alto saxophone, so that was my main instrument for a lot of years before I even picked up the tenor saxophone. But I wanted to sound like Johnny Hodges, and then I wanted to sound like Coleman Hawkins. And those are the sounds that I strive for on each of the instruments. So that's my little story.
You mentioned both Johnny Hodges and Coleman Hawkins as heroes, and I certainly grew up with my heroes. I mean, that's in some way how I found or decided what was a good sound. Is the guys that I loved, literally out and out trying to sound like them. And I often encounter students who actively avoid trying to sound like someone in the name of being completely original. How much does emulation, let's say, play a role in the early development of developing a saxophone sound?
Well, for me, it was everything. I wanted that particular sound, and I think that along the way, you try to copy someone, and then you take this from this one, and you try to copy somebody else, and you take that from that one, and your sound eventually comes out of these different ones that you have tried to copy. So it's not exactly like them, but you have a part of their sound within your sound.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the way we all did it. We have our heroes that we try to sound just like them. And then 6 months later, you have another one, or a year later, or 2 years later, it's somebody else. And then it's somebody else. And in all that time, you end up having inspiration from these people and sounding like them somewhat, but you end up having your own sound, which you have at the beginning, but you don't know what it is. And these are kind of guideposts that just guide you along to getting your own sound, and not only sound, but articulation and nuances and inflections and dialect, whether it's an R&B dialect or a bebop dialect or Charlie Parker dialect or swing dialect, the way you play time. And for a person to think that they're just going to come up with a new sound without paying homage to the greats before them and checking all these great sounds out, it would be a lot more difficult, I would think. I mean, I guess anything is possible, but it sure would be a lot easier to just like, I'm sure, how many basketball players have been influenced by Michael Jordan at this point and emulate the way he shoots and plays the game, and it's the same thing with music.